Hey. That is a disgusting act by Randy Moss.
He did what?
Jackpot, baby!
Ice up, son. Ice up.
That is blasphemous.
You can put it on the board. Yes.
We will be getting to this segment, the new NFL head coaching hires. You know, there are a few that I was like, okay, I can get behind that. And there are a few that left me scratching my head. Actually, check that. All of them were leaving me scratching my head. We'll start off with the Las Vegas Raiders. They went with Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels, the Patriots coordinator. I believe he's the offensive coordinator. I don't really care because I don't think it's a good hire. Because for a few reasons. Because everybody, right? Do y'all remember when he was supposed to take the Colts job, right? We all remember that, right? Yeah. And then he took the job and then decided, nah, I don't want that job. And then he said, no, I'm going back to New England. And then the Colts were like, okay. All right. Thanks, Josh. Sounds good. That was odd, right? So, and then that led me to believe that, Josh McDaniels was going to be the guy that took over when Bill Belichick retired, right? That was kind of what I thought was going to happen. Well, okay. I mean, I guess not, because he's going to go to the Raiders. I mean, hey, as long as he doesn't send any bad emails, I guess it can't be as worse as the last guy to hold that position. But I don't know. For my liking, I think the Raiders should have kept their interim head coach Rich Bisaccia. And sure, I may not have heard of the guy until this season, but I mean, you think about some of the things that the Raiders were that they were dealing with, right? John Gruden, that whole debacle. Then Henry Ruggs killed somebody because he couldn't get an Uber, or because he wouldn't get an Uber. He could have, but he didn't. And then they had that defensive guy, what was his name? Arnett. He was waving guns on TikTok or whatever. That was weird. So yeah, the Raiders have been through a little bit this season. And somehow, he stepped in and somehow took that team to the playoffs. Yeah, the playoffs. Took Derek Carr to his first playoff ever, right? To his first playoff appearance ever. Pretty remarkable in my book. And then he also did something after the season that really is something that I respect him for. And that is after the season was over, officially, right? After they lost to the Bengals on Wild Card weekend, Rich Bisaccia sat down, I believe it was in his hotel room, and hand wrote letters of thanks and gratitude to the players, basically just saying, I thank you for, not only the opportunity to be your head coach, but also, thanking them for their patience, thanking them for, sticking with it, thanking them for, being a great team. Like, just, I don't know, that was pretty. That was a pretty good thing, right? I thought that was, major props to him, right? He definitely earned some respect in my book a little bit. And I think that when a guy sits down in his hotel room and the night after a loss and hand writes thank you letters to personally hand writes letters to every player on the football team, whether you played every snap or whether you played no snaps, you got a thank you letter from Rich Bisaccia. I don't know. That seems pretty good, right? And I don't know. Maybe it was the aspect that, okay, he didn't really have a lot of experience, but I don't know what it was. I feel like the Raiders kind of missed the boat on that. I could be wrong about that. Josh Daniels could prove to be a really good head coach down the road. Who knows? But I don't know. Just from what he did to come in the middle of that, for lack of words, dumpster fire, and take the team to the playoffs, and then the whole thank you note thing, like, I don't know. Personally, I would have gone with him. But obviously the Raiders did not feel the same. The Chicago Bears hired former Colts defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus. I don't really know how to pronounce his name. I think it's Eberflus. I know for certain it's not Eberflus. I've heard that a few times. I know it's not that. I know it's Eberflus or Eberflus. But regardless of what his name is, I was scratching my head at the thought of another defensive coordinator, right? defense is not really a huge issue with the Chicago Bears. And I know that, like, when you think about Chicago Bears football, like, the defense is like just what they kind of build their team around, right? In the good old days. But in years prior, like, defense has not been the reason that the Bears have lost games. Their defense has been really good, actually. Just their offense has been abysmal. And I think that I don't think they need a defensive-minded coach, because the defense obviously has things figured out. Now, maybe if you take a defensive-minded coach out of that situation, things change a little bit. But I think that for the Chicago Bears, you need an offensive-minded head coach. And the reason I say you need one is because the offense has been the downfall of the Chicago Bears in years prior. And, I think that if you were going to go with a defensive, backgrounded, a head coach with a background in defense, I should say, I'm not sure that Matt Eberflus was the right guy, And sure, the Colts defense had some good moments last season. Sure, they've had some good, they've been pretty good in the past. But it always seemed like when it got down to crunch time, right, when they really needed to stop, when they really needed to up their game, when they really needed to play their A game, they always fell short, it felt like. They were up by, what was it? I forget the exact margin, but they were blowing the Ravens out this season. That all they needed to do was just play good defense, and they win the game, and they blow it. They were going into the game against the Jaguars. Now, the offense had issues for the Colts, but their defense, right? All you got to do is prevent the Jaguars from scoring and let your offense do the thing. The defense kind of, they're a big disappointment, we'll say. So it seemed like whenever they needed big, whenever they needed a big performance, they fell short. And you can't, I think you can obviously give certain levels of blame to the players, but you look at that defensive roster for the Colts in the previous years, that's a good defense. And I just felt like the play calling, I felt like the decisions made on defense from a coaching standpoint kind of fell short of what you're looking for. So I'm not saying that any of these guys, I'm not going to come out like Colin Cowherd or Mike Francesa and say, these guys are going to stink, right? These guys, they're not going to do anything. I'm not going to say that, because whenever somebody does say that, it always comes back to bite them in the butt a little bit. So I'm just going to say that the hire kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, but I will certainly leave open the possibility that they could have a lot of success down the road. The Denver Broncos hired Nathaniel Hackett, who I didn't know who he was until the hire came out. Then they said, he's the Packers offensive coordinator. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. They're not having Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams and Robert Tonyan and Valdez Scantling and Olivia St. Brown. They're not going to have all those guys in Denver. Now, sure, they do have Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, KJ Hamler. And sure, they do have talent in Denver, right? Don't misunderstand my point. But, I don't know. It's one thing to have Aaron Rodgers and another thing to have Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. And I think that Nathaniel Hackett, I don't know how much of the Packers' offensive success you can put on on Hackett. And I'm not sure how much of that success you can say, well, they got Aaron Rodgers, right? They're going to be successful either way, whether they have Nathaniel Hackett or whether they have, George Bush as the offensive coordinator, right? So there's been that conversation. I think Nathaniel Hackett is kind of one of the bigger under the radar hires, right? Like, everybody knows Josh McDaniels. A lot of people are familiar with Matt Eberflus, whatever his name is. Not a ton of people are familiar with Nathaniel Hackett. I think just because the talent in Green Bay kind of overshadowed anything that he did with them. So I don't know. I do leave the possibility of success with Denver with Hackett, but I think without a doubt they're going to need a quarterback, right? That's step one. You need a good quarterback. You need a franchise guy, right? Teddy Bridgewater's only going to be around, in the NFL for so much longer. And I hate to break it to you, Drew Lock fans out there, but he's not the guy either. Okay, I've seen quite enough of Drew Lock to make up my mind on him. And, I think the defense for the Broncos is kind of in a rebuilding stage, right? Much because of the fact that they lost Von Miller due to trade this season rather. And I think that for the Broncos, I think having a defensive background, a head coach with defensive background, like taking Matt Eberflus, for example, hiring him as the Broncos head coach would make me, for me at least, that would make sense because their defense needs some help right now. The Broncos defense does. Their offense, you put a good quarterback in that situation, their offense is good. Their offense is clicking. Their offense is set. Right? But where they need help and where they need to kind of, rebuild a little bit is defense. And so, I don't know. That was kind of odd. I think that if you switch Nathaniel Hackett and Matt Eberflus, right, and now a Green Bay guy is never going to go to Chicago, but you switch those two around, and now things, for me at least, start to make a little bit more sense. And then, of course, you have the Giants hire Brian Dabel. We'll get into a little bit more of that, a little more background of that in the next segment, beginning of hour number 2 here shortly. But Brian Dabel, he was the offensive coordinator with the Bills, right? Let me just double check on that. Brian Dabel, I believe he was one of the coordinators with the Bills. He was the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Yes, there you go. So, he gets a job in New York. That's another one where I think, well, I don't know what to say about the New York Giants. They need help on both sides of the ball. There's not really one where you say, well, they're set on this side, but they need help on this side. They're just a mess right now. And so I think it's just going to take an absolute, it's going to take a guy that is very good in both aspects of football to turn that thing around, because that's just a dumpster fire right now. So I don't know what's going to happen with Brian Dabel and the New York Giants, because the Giants have been quite a mess in the past 5 years, ever since Eli Manning left. People are going to be upset about one thing, other than Brian Flores, you're going to hear a lot of angered commenters over the next few months talk about how Eric Bieniemy isn't getting an interview or hire again, right? This is going to be the third year in a row where you hear Eric Bieniemy this, Eric Bieniemy that, blah, 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 blah. I've taken some real good time to think about this, because Eric Bieniemy I think he is deserving of a head coaching job, right? But I think there's multiple possibilities of why he's not getting an interview or he's getting interviewed and not getting hired. But there's one sensible reason that he's not getting any jobs over the past few years. I personally think Eric Bieniemy is being groomed to take over for Andy Reid when Andy Reid leaves or retires. I think Eric Bieniemy is going to be the head coach when Andy Reid is gone. I think Bieniemy is set to be the next Chiefs head coach. That's my take on the whole thing. I could be totally wrong. I have no clue.